will remain anonymous when shared with registered responders. Results will be communicated by email only to responding vendors. Debriefs for successful vendors will be scheduled 3 days after July 3rd. The successful vendor will be required to discuss options and finalize the lunch 5 days before the scheduled lunch. So for Lunch Patron 3, it may seem like it's a lot of work, and it may seem that the description's quite long, but when you look at it, the amount of flexibility and openness, and also the pretty direct response about their preferences, this is laid out in a way that vendors will look at it and say, you know what, even though I may not have their exact preference, I can still put something together that they're going to like. The other thing about Lunch Patron number 3 that is good or beneficial is the process. They describe the process really well. And you know that if you respond to this, if you take the time to respond to this and you don't win, there's going to be value in the debriefs. And that's something that vendors also look for. It's that how mature is this organization in evaluating RFPs and dealing with the people that didn't win? Because as a vendor, if I put in weeks of work into this, at least tell me where I can improve in the future. Tell me why I didn't win, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation of, well, I dumped you because it's not me, it's you. But, vendors are professional about this. Most of us are. As a vendor, if I receive these 3 bids, the first thing that I would probably consider is I would look at the pricing sections. Vendor 3 already said in the pricing that their budget is $50. Vendor 1 just said a cost estimate for the hamburger. Vendor 2 said they got a budget of $3, and any response over $3 will be considered but have points reduced. So as a vendor, I look at this and I think to myself, okay, well, the chances are I'm going to make the most money off of number 3 if I win. And the other benefit is that when I look at Lunch Patron number 3, they're giving me the ability to suggest alternatives.
Go ahead.
A notice of intent is really that when you're at the very early stages in RFP, the organization who's released the RFP is asking you by a certain date to send in a letter of intent saying that you're going to respond to the RFP or you're going to not respond to the RFP. This is really important when you're in organizations with time crunches or strong objectives, or just in general, it's important. The notice of intent, it's kind of like RSVPing for a party. If you have a house party, if you know that you invited 50 people, or you just put a general invite out there, you would really like to know, how much chips should I get? How much beer should I get? How much whiskey should I get? How many people don't drink? How many people do drink? So it's really important for you to understand, how many people are coming to your party. The worst thing in the world is when you put out an RFP and you don't get enough respondents. Just this week, I had an email from a bid coordinator or a head of procurement at an organization that's asked me, why didn't you respond to this RFP? And it turns out that they only got 2 responses back and they didn't like any of them and they ended up canceling the RFP. The problem is that this was for their back-end accounting and ERP system. So this organization of thousands of people, their objective to install and implement a new ERP system to improve the efficiency of their organization has now been put behind by 6-7 months or more because they have to reissue the RFP. A notice of intent, although may not have totally resolved this problem, a notice of intent would have let them know ahead of time that they only have 2 or 3 interested people. And if that's the case, then they can do something before the whole process goes off. The organization description, although it seems that it is just fluff, it's actually extremely valuable because, first of all, if you just copy stuff which is on your website, it's really of no value to us. And because you don't, that's the watered down story. But what I'm looking for, what we look for when you describe your organization is, why are you buying this particular product? And I'm not saying you have to call it out exactly, but tell us the culture of the organization. Tell us about what's happening in the organization that this product would benefit from. So the organizational description really helps the vendor decide, yeah, I want to work with this organization and I want to help them. So the problem statement really is a description of why you're going to RFP and what is the problem you're trying to solve.
Perfect. Okay. Impressing the vendor by showing that you have your act together. Give me a statement about that.
Something which is really important is to, showing the vendor that, first of all, you have done homework, that you understand that there might be this many possible solutions in this area, or you've heard of other organizations that have taken a particular approach. And it's really important for you to write this in a way that the vendor can see your understanding. So if you really don't know what you're doing, admit to it. If you do know what you're doing, tell them that, hey, we understand this, and this. You could be wrong. Chances are you're right with your research. But the bottom line is, make sure you communicate the truth to the vendor. Don't lie, don't make everything up. This is not a competition to make the vendor jump through hoops. It is something that will benefit you when the vendor looks at it and says, you know what, 80% of this is correct, but in our experience, this other 20% needs to change. And here's why. So the problem statement can be fundamental in the overall outcome and benefit for your organization.
Freaking perfect. Okay. The ostensible purpose of the Q&A section, why do we have Q&A? Okay? So give me just that with the pauses. Why do we have Q&A?
So the Q&A allows us to clarify certain sections of the RFP and to ask questions that will help us understand the scope. Often the problem statement and the questions are built in a certain way from your perception, but there are many things that could be left out for us to be able to put together a scope of work or suggest a product that is best for you. So the Q&A really allows us to really clarify or make certain of what you're asking for.
Perfect. Now give me the dirty pool. Planting questions.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? What do you mean by that, and why do you do it? Go ahead.
One of the interesting things about Q&A is that from a vendor's perspective, often what we would do is ask certain questions to either indicate a position of power and or influence the RFP into a certain direction, or to trick other vendors into thinking that a certain capability or solution already exists. And it's a kind of an interesting way to influence the bid into your favor. For example, let's say we're tendering for a hamburger. One of the questions you could ask is, oh, by the way, most hamburgers are made with beef. We make a 50% pork burger, and we find that with that pork burger, it makes it way more juicy and way more flavorful. Do you have a preference for which type of meat? And if the organization comes back and says, wow, that's great, we would love to have a 50% pork burger, well, then you're scaring away everybody else. You're scaring away the vegetarian restaurants. You're scaring away the all beef or chicken restaurants. So it's just a way that, I can go into more examples, but you can influence quite a bit by appropriate questions.
Perfect. I never even actually, even if that's it. Yeah. Go ahead.
So something about the submission dates and times that it takes a while for people to understand when they get into this process is that most organizations will have a procurement office. And that procurement office has a procurement desk. And you have to hand in the tender there. And when it says that the RFP is due on Thursday at 4 p.m., a lot of times in the RFP it will say it's due 4 p.m. on the clock in the procurement office desk. And you will walk in there, and if you're walking in and it says 4:01 and you go in to submit that bid, they will say, no thank you, we don't want it. They will just not accept it. So 10 seconds late, you can't submit the bid. So, but you've got to remember that this is something that your organization's probably cost you about $100,000 to submit a good bid, and that because you stopped to get a coffee, it's late. As a senior sales guy with too many years experience, a lot of times, people say, hey, do you want me to submit the bid in? I'll go to the procurement office. Like, no, I'll take it in. Because you just don't want it. If something goes wrong, you want it to be your fault. One time